Unit 4A, Nationalism and Sectionalism.
Nationalism is a feeling of pride, loyalty, and protectiveness toward your country. As nationalism spread, James Monroe won the presidential election of 1816, and the Federalist Party soon disappeared. These political differences soon led to what was called the Era of Good Feelings.
Economic nationalism. Nationalist Henry Clay created the plan of the American system, which included three main parts. Part 1. Establish a protective tariff. Northern industries were supportive, Southern economy was hurt. Part 2. Establish a national bank, would issue currency and control state banks. Part 3. Improve the country's transportational systems. Private companies develop the improvements.
Sectionalism. Sectionalism is loyalty to the interests of your own region or section of the country rather than to the nation as a whole. Sectionalism became a major issue when Missouri applied for statehood in 1817. People living in Missouri wanted to allow slavery in their state. At the time, the U.S. had 11 slave states and 11 free states.
This led to what is known as the Missouri Compromise, which was proposed by Henry Clay, and it suggested that Missouri was a slave state and Maine was a free state.
Sectionalism in the economy. The North. Ships, timber, clothes, and corn were being made. The laborers were children, young women, especially immigrants who were Irish and German. Manufacturing led to the rise in the middle class, and development of the middle class, stronger connection in the federal government were social consequences. In the West, wheat, logs, and lumber were being harvested. Men who were looking for fortune were the laborers. Development of cities and towns were the economic consequences. An increase in independence was the social consequence. In the South, cash crops, aka cotton and rice, were being grown. Slaves were the laborers, and bigger economic gap between wealthy and poor were economic consequences, and slavery is to blame.
Andrew Jackson versus the Bank of the U.S. In 1791, Hamilton established the Bank of the U.S. In 1811, the Bank of the U.S. charter was not renewed. Then, in 1860, Henry Clay's American system re-established the Bank of the U.S. In 1819, the Panic of 1819 led to paper money being worth less, states' mistrust, which led to McCulloch versus Maryland, which is the dispute in McCulloch involving the legality of the national bank and a tax that the state of Maryland imposed on it. In 1823, Nicholas Biddle became president of the Bank of the U.S. and 40 congressmen held stock. Why Andrew Jackson hated the Bank of the U.S. One reason was it almost became penniless in the 1819 panic. The second reason was he believed the banks aided the wealthy East and drained the species of the West. The third reason was foreign countries owned stock in the bank and foreigners were on the board, and Andrew Jackson was a nationalist. The fourth reason was Henry Clay and Daniel Webster promoted the Bank of the U.S., convincing Biddle to renew the charter early in 1832. This led to Jackson versus Biddle. Andrew Jackson was self-taught and Biddle was a Princeton man. Biddle wrote a report on the Bank of the U.S. and used the Bank of the U.S. funds to publish. Andrew Jackson wanted the Bank of the U.S. and the U.S. Treasury to combine so Biddle would lose his job. Pet banks were established, and Andrew Jackson had a Secretary of Treasury remove funds from the Bank of the U.S. into pet banks, which were also state banks. This reduced Andrew Jackson's popularity because he did it without Congress's approval. All of this led to the Panic of 1837. Andrew Jackson's financial policies and speculation in Western lands led to inflation. He issued the Specie Circular Presidential Order, which meant federal lands had to be purchased with gold or silver. The bank notes lost value and less land purchase led to a financial crisis.
The spoils system was a practice in which a political party, after winning an election, gives government civil service jobs to its supporters, friends, and relatives as a reward for working toward victory and as an incentive to keep working for the party. The nullification theory was a legal theory that a state has the right to nullify or invalidate any federal law which that state has deemed unconstitutional with respect to the United States Constitution. The case of Marbury versus Madison was about a U.S. Supreme Court that established the principle of judicial review in the United States, meaning that American courts have the power to strike down laws, statutes, and some government actions that contravened the U.S. Constitution. The Monroe Doctrine closed the Western Hemisphere to European colonization and promised that the U.S. would stay out of European affairs, remain U.S. foreign policy until World War I.
The push and pull factors of the West. Pull factors included new job opportunities, fertilized land, and there was gold being found. Their freedom of religious belief, land, and adventure. Push factors included family conflict, high costs of living in the East, discrimination, and religious oppression.